Hello and welcome once again to The Blueprints. This is Canada's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock, with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, even throughout the summer. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. Tell your friends they can download it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. You name it, it is out there. On today's show, Canadians in Cuba. We're talking about the states of our national defense and much, much more. To do that, we bring on James Bezan, the Member of Parliament for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman, in the province of Manitoba, also the critic for national defense. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
All right, we had some Canadian Armed Forces members in Cuba not too long ago. They were there to celebrate some anniversary of relations between Canada and Cuba. But there was a bit of controversy that went along with that.
Yeah, so one is, why are we sending the Royal Canadian Navy to a communist dictatorship like Cuba? And we're sending them to do a port visit, and they are there at this very same time that our adversary, the Russian Federation, is there with their Navy. Mm-hmm. And I think, to have them sitting there celebrating alongside the Russians, the Cuban dictatorship, sends all the wrong messages to Canadians, to our allies, but especially our ally in Ukraine. I think they'd be very disappointed that our guys are down there partying it up, celebrating the Castros and Diaz-Canel now. As dictators, it is just shocking. It's disappointing. And again, here we go, another embarrassment on the foreign policy side for Justin Trudeau and his Liberals.
Well, I'm old enough to remember that very famous, infamous tweet, however you want to look at it, when Fidel Castro passed away and Justin Trudeau tweeted out that basically he was such a statesman and all that, forgetting the thousands that died at his hand.
Yeah, and there's still political prisoners in Cuba today. Yeah. And so, anyone that stands for freedom and anyone that goes out in the streets and are protesting in Havana or Santiago or any of the other cities in Cuba because of the food rationing, the electricity shortages, fresh water that isn't available, anyone that goes out there gets immediately arrested. Some of them are in jail for weeks and years at a time. And let's not forget that it was a bloody coup that took down the government, and that we saw, tens of thousands of Cubans who owned property, who owned businesses, who loved freedom, were executed and killed in that revolution. So that bloody coup resulted in why we have so many Cubans living in the United States and Canada today, because they desire freedom and democracy. They desire to get away from that type of brutal dictatorship. And so, as you said, Justin Trudeau admired Castro. Mm-hmm. He said that he always admired, communist dictatorships. And so it's no wonder that this is the third port of call visit by the Royal Canadian Navy since Trudeau has become Prime Minister. And to do that alongside the Russians is unconscionable.
Yeah, it doesn't make too much sense, but I don't think much in this government does. So, for example, we had the Navy, as you just mentioned, down in Cuba, but the foreign minister didn't seem to know about it. Really, let's cue up cut one. This is, when I saw this interview, I almost fell off my chair. It was unbelievable. Play cut one.
HMCS Margaret Brooke, which is a patrol vessel from Canada, gone to Havana for 3 days starting tomorrow to celebrate Canada-Cuba bilateral relations. And there's some eyebrows being raised because it's in port at the same time that Russian military vessels, including nuclear-powered submarines, are there. Why would Canada have a Canadian ship in a Cuban port at the same time as Russian military vessels are there?
Listen, this is something that I have to look much more closer to. This is an information that is news to me because the Minister of Defense also works with CAF and DND on this very issue. But of course, we'll look into this and get back.
It's no wonder our allies don't talk to us anymore. We have policy like this. The foreign minister had no clue that we sent a warship down to Cuba while Russians were already in port, while they have a conflict in Ukraine.
you got to look at the paper trail too. So we knew from a press release that the HMCS Margaret Brooke was going to be in the Caribbean, part of the counter narcotics efforts that are happening there. And let's also put it in perspective. This is one of our Arctic patrol ships. It's an icebreaker. It's meant to be in the Arctic. It has very limited coastal capabilities for surveillance. It's not a frigate. And so we're talking about a lightly armed coastal vessel for our Arctic that can go through 1 year or young sea ice up in the Arctic. So it's down there. It's cruising around. It is still a very, very nice ship. And then 2 days before they go on the protocol, then all of a sudden there's a press release that they're going to make a protocol to celebrate Cuba's Independence Day, and that they're going to be there for that. When that should have been enough to start raising some red flags. What are we doing pulling in to celebrate a communist dictatorship? And the Minister of Foreign Affairs had no idea. Here is the right hand not knowing what the left hand's doing. And the comments from Blair afterwards all looks like a huge cover-up, because I believe that all this is directed straight from Prime Minister Trudeau. The PMO made the decision, we want to be there, we want to celebrate Cuba, and are using our Royal Canadian Navy, and now as we see, even the Royal Canadian band members as pawns to further his admiration for communist dictatorships.
So these pictures were tweeted out, I believe, by the embassy, Canadian embassy in Cuba. So we can see our Canadian Armed Forces members, obviously a member of the Royal Navy there, enjoying the festivities, but again,
leading the Congo line.
Leading the Congo line, as you pointed out, it's very interesting relations to a country that is supporting Russia, is with them all the way, it seems, in terms of what they're doing and their relations, but even to the Americans too. We remember the days of John F. Kennedy when there was a very real crisis.
Yeah, so is this the special military mission that Bill Blair was talking about in his press conference at the end of session? And it does come down to that this is a slap in the face to our allies like Ukraine. It does undermine, again, it's another foreign affairs gap and gaffe. And it's again an international embarrassment for Canada, and it's all perpetrated by Justin Trudeau himself. And so you talk about Ukraine. We got to remember that you talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis under JFK. You talk about the Bay of Pigs. It'd be different if we're sending our HMCS Margaret Brooke to visit the U.S. Marines at Guantanamo Bay, where the U.S. is established. That would be different than pulling in Havana and leading the Congo line. That's not the military mission I think most Canadians had in mind. So, let's not forget, Cuba has supported Putin in his war in Ukraine. They have endorsed Vladimir Putin's reasonings for invading our friend Ukraine. We know that Cuban men have signed up as mercenaries with the Russian military to fight in Ukraine. And we know that Cuba has sent some of their own military to Belarus, another major ally of Ukraine, and now nuclear weapons from Russia, or a major ally of Putin, with nuclear weapons from the Kremlin sitting in Minsk. And Cuban soldiers are training alongside Belarusian soldiers with Russian soldiers, ready to further advance their aggression against not just Ukraine, but our NATO allies as well. And of course, very close to Belarus is Canadian soldiers that are leading the NATO mission in Latvia.
Mm-hmm. So before we get off the topic of Melanie Joly, because I really don't want to let this incompetence pass us by. So if they're having the party at the embassy, the foreign minister is in charge of the embassies, so she should know about that. And if she didn't, why not? Is she not reading her notes? Is she just incompetent? Is she just left out of the conversation in general? This is our top diplomat we're talking about.
Right. And either it's laissez-faire, she doesn't care, or it is pure incompetence. And or for very specific reasons, the PMO is not sharing information with her.
Yeah.
So I think we can do a lot of speculation around the reasons of that as well. But again, that points to the fact that for her to not to know before going on the national television is ridiculous. And looks really silly when you're talking about a major faux pas for her not knowing, and for us to allow the Royal Canadian Navy to go and celebrate a communist dictatorship along with our adversaries, the Russian Federation and Vladimir Putin's war machine.
Yeah, it makes no sense. And then, on top of all that, we have a recruitment crisis in the Canadian Armed Forces. So they're not being used properly, and they're not being actually, equipped properly. We all know the stories about that. Housing, bringing their own rations and equipment when they're on mission. And now we have the issue that we're going to very soon have, we are in a major shortage, but very soon, if we don't up these numbers, we're going to be in a really bad place.
We're in a bad place already. We got a shortage of 17,000 troops in the reserves and reg forces. And we hear the stories of military families lining up at food banks. The affordability crisis is hitting them as well. And we just had on April 1st a rent hike done by Bill Blair on those military families that live on base and in military housing, and they couldn't afford that. We know that we're short 6,700 residential housing units on base for our troops. And because we're so short and the housing stock that's there is less than desirable, and some of it's not fit for a purpose to live in, we're seeing more and more of our military members living rough, is what they call it. But they're unhoused. They're couch surfing, living in their car, living in a camper, and we've even heard in Halifax that some of them are living in tents.
That's incredible. These are soldiers.
These are soldiers, and this is the way the Liberals treat them. And so no wonder we have a retention and recruitment crisis. Morale is down, and when things like this happen in Cuba, a lot of our folks say, I'm not interested in belonging to a Canadian Armed Forces that is being used to further the left-wing liberal ideology that Justin Trudeau is forcing down their throats. And as long as that ideology continues to be pushed on them, we're going to see them pushed out as well. Yeah. And so we have to turn this ship around. And we have to get people hired quicker and enlisted faster and out to basic training. Last year, we just heard the story that we had over 70,000 Canadians that actually applied, and only 3,000 were accepted. And not all of those 3,000 are going to make it through the entire process. It's taking too long to do security clearances, medical sign-off on recruits, and then by the time we get them out to St. John for basic training, we are running out of that middle management that does that training. Right. Corporals, master corporals, sergeants, sergeant majors, petty officers, all that is falling by the wayside because those are the people who just said, I've had enough, I'm checking out after 12 years, 20 years.
Yeah, so people may have experience maybe in theater or without, but those that are actually done a bit of time.
Yeah, those are the people that create, our next soldier, air crew, and sailors, and we need them there to help mentor them along and train them up, and we are training warriors, and we want to make sure that we honor that and restore the respect within for the Canadian Armed Forces, as well as respect amongst each other. And we do that through having a strong military ethos that embraces the culture of warfighting.
But how do we honor the soldiers when they don't even have the right equipment, the most updated equipment?
Yep.
How is that honoring?
So I just got back a question on the order paper, asking how ready and able are we with our frigates. And it has continued to decline year after year over the last 3 years, to the point now that only 40% of our frigates are ever available to sail in the Atlantic coast or the Pacific coast. And this is our main Navy warship that we like to deploy to help our allies in places like the Mediterranean, like the Baltic Sea, sailing in the South China Sea and the Strait of Taiwan to, enforce the freedom of navigation, to make sure that the Russians and the People's Liberation Army Navy of the People's Republic of China know of our presence and that we're there with our allies like the United States, Australia, and other NATO members. We will continue as conservatives, to stand up for those that stand up for us. And so as Canadians, we have to make sure we get them the equipment they need, whether it's making sure we finally get the ships delivered, that planes are getting delivered on time. And especially for our Army, we've seen a lot of our kit that the Liberals have donated to Ukraine, much needed equipment. But what about the replacement of that equipment? You know, we need new howitzers. We need to have build up our ammunition supplies, especially of 155 shells. We need to make sure that you know, land vehicles are getting replaced quicker and upgraded. You know, one thing we've learned about the war in Ukraine is it's a tank war, and Canada right now is severely undernumbered in the number of Leopard tanks we have. We're sending you know, a bunch into Ukraine. 8 went to Ukraine, then we've forward positioned a bunch more in Latvia for our troops there. But we have very few tanks left to train on, and we need to be modernizing, buying new tanks. Defense policy update's very weak on that. About you know, there should be decisions made and orders placed, because it takes years to procure this type of equipment. So we have to continue to push forward to get that done. And you know, but once you have all that equipment, got to make sure you have the great Canadians to man that. So whether it's having enough pilots to fly our new F-35s, what we originally wanted to buy back in 2010, are only going to show up here in the next couple of years. But right now we are in a pilot crisis, especially fighter pilots, and we won't have the people there to train, nor are we able to train them here in Canada. We have to actually send them to the States or Italy for training on the F-35.
Well, so you mentioned a few just in the last statement here. The planes on time, getting planes on time. This could have been here years ago.
Yep.
Stephen Harper was, you know, quite adamant that the F-35 was the way to go, and a lot of our allies were doing the same, including Italy, as you just mentioned, and many others. It was the Trudeau government that stopped that.
Trudeau campaigned on it. He would not buy the F-35. He's always had a thing against fighter jets. Like when we were government, we deployed our CF-18s to help in against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And you know, he made the comment, you're walking around, whipping out and showing everybody how big your CF-18s are. Like, he's been naive and really weak when it comes to supporting our military and what we need to do in a dangerous world. The world is getting more and more precarious. Canada needs to be ready to defend us here at home, to support continental defense with the Americans, and to be able to be a valued and reliable partner in NATO, as well as we're working with our other allies in the Indo-Pacific to deal with, you know, aggression and geopolitical games coming from places like Russia and Beijing.
But this government is hollowing out our military. What was the last report? If a conflict were to happen, we have about 3 days worth of ammunition here.
That's all we have, and all you have to do here it is. You know, over I guess we're coming up on 30 months since the war in Ukraine broke out, and the government is only now starting to book the orders to increase production of artillery shells. You know, Chief of Defense Staff Wayne Eyre said that we've got 3 days worth of ammo based upon the way ammo is getting used in Ukraine, at over 10,000 rounds, artillery rounds every single day. And so we have to increase our industrial capability to produce more, and we have to put more into our own storage and work with our allies to make that happen.
All right, James, we're pretty much out of time. Actually, we are out of time. It was a great conversation, though. It flew by pretty fast. As you know, the guests get the last word, so the floor is yours.
Well, I'd just say this, that speaking about Ukraine, one thing that we did early on this year is our leader, Pierre Poilievre, asked our government to send our CRV-7 rockets that have been sitting in storage for over 20 years. And some of these are over 40 years old. Now, these CRV-7 rockets were used in our CF-18s. And, of course, we were retiring the CF-18s, and we went over to a different rocket rather than the CRV-7s. Canadian-made, sitting in storage in Saskatchewan, collecting dust. The Ukrainians asked for them back in November. Trudeau ignored them. We asked them to send them the 83,000, send these rockets, instead of wasting millions of taxpayer money in disposing of these rockets, donate them to Ukraine and let them dispose of them the way that they can do on the Russian invaders. And it was crickets. The government pushed back. It's not safe. They finally announced, here in June that they're sending 2,000. I can tell you the testing on these rockets have gone very well. They need to send the rest of the 80,000. Ukraine needs them desperately. We don't need to waste taxpayer money in disposing of them. The quicker we can get there, the more lives we save, and the greater opportunity is for Ukraine to stop the Russians in their tracks.
I like the way you think. Thank you very much, James.
Thanks for having me on the show.
I appreciate your time, but also your knowledge in the subject and the work you're doing for Canada's military. You're a great advocate for them, and I'm sure they appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. James Bezan, Member of Parliament for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman, in the beautiful province of Manitoba. Thank him for his time. Thank you for yours. Again, we'll have new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, even throughout the summer, because this is a message you're probably not getting in the mainstream media. So we ask that you like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. Tell your friends. They can also download it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. You name it, it is out there. Until next week, remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint.